The night air in the Pacific Northwest was cold and damp, a thick mist weaving between the towering trees like a living thing. The forest was silent, save for the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant howl of a coyote. The Smith family had set up camp just before dusk, nestled deep in the dense wilderness. They'd been planning this trip for months, a break from the grind of everyday life, an escape into nature to bond and recharge. Father Jack Smith was a tall man with broad shoulders, his face etched with lines of responsibility and the weight of his job as an engineer. He had always been the protector, the one who ensured his family was safe, no matter what. His wife, Maria, was warm, with dark eyes that had the kind of depth that made Jack feel like he'd never truly understood her, despite their years of marriage. Their daughter, Lily, was 13, a curious child with an adventurous spirit that mirrored her father's. The fire crackled in front of them, casting long shadows on the tent behind. They ate their dinner, talking about school, work, and their plans for hiking the next day. The light of the fire painted their faces in a golden glow, a sharp contrast to the cold night air that clung to the earth. Jack leaned back in his folding chair, the warmth from the fire against his skin a welcome comfort. "It's peaceful out here," he said, glancing around at the towering pines. Maria smiled, her face softening. "It's perfect, just us. No distractions." Lily looked up at the sky, her face full of wonder. "Look at all the stars," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's like they're watching us." But something in the air had changed. The temperature dropped suddenly, and the hair on the back of Jack's neck stood up. He glanced at Maria and Lily, but both were still looking at the stars. He turned his gaze upward, the serene beauty of the night sky now tainted by an uneasy feeling he couldn't shake. A low hum vibrated the ground beneath them. It was faint at first, so faint that Jack thought it might have been the wind or an animal moving through the forest. But the hum grew louder, deeper, an unnatural sound, unlike anything he had ever heard. Lily looked up from the fire, her brow furrowing. "What's that noise?" Maria stiffened, looking at Jack with uncertainty. "Jack, what is that?" Jack stood up slowly, scanning the tree line. The hum was growing stronger, accompanied by a soft but unmistakable thrumming sound, like something powerful was descending from the sky. His heart began to race. "Lily, get in the tent," he said, his voice sharp. "Now." Suddenly, a flash of light streaked across the sky, a blinding white beam that cut through the darkness like a blade. It descended rapidly, disappearing behind the trees with a thunderous crack that shook the earth. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "Lily, now!" Jack shouted, his voice rising with urgency. But it was too late. A massive craft appeared from behind the trees, hovering just above the ground. Its sleek, metallic surface shimmered in the dim moonlight. The craft was enormous, easily the size of a football field, unlike any airplane, helicopter, or drone Jack had ever encountered. There were no windows, no visible doors, just smooth, reflective surfaces that pulsed with an eerie blue glow. The ground beneath their feet rumbled as if the earth itself was shaking in fear. Maria screamed, grabbing Lily's arm. Jack moved instinctively, standing between his family and the craft. The light from the craft intensified, almost blinding, and a heavy pressure seemed to weigh down on them. Jack's mind raced. What were they dealing with? His fingers twitched, reaching for the pocket knife in his waistband, the only weapon he had on him. The hum from the craft grew louder, now accompanied by a low, resonant voice like 1,000 whispers echoing through the trees. "You are chosen." Jack's breath caught in his throat. Maria clutched Lily to her chest. Jack saw it, figures emerging from the craft. Tall, slender beings, their bodies covered in tight, shimmering suits. Their eyes were enormous, black and glassy, like deep, endless pools of darkness. Jack felt terror flood his chest, but he stood his ground. They weren't taking his family, not without a fight. Lily's eyes were wide, her voice barely a whisper. "Daddy, what are they?" Jack swallowed hard, his mind screaming for him to act. His hands trembled as he pulled the pocket knife from his waistband. A creature stepped forward, its elongated arm outstretched. The air around it seemed to shimmer, vibrating with an otherworldly energy. "You will come with us." "No," Jack shouted, stepping forward. He opened the pocket knife, gripping it tightly. "Stay away from my family." The creature didn't respond, but its hand lifted, and a pulse of energy surged through the air, hitting Jack square in the chest. He was knocked to the ground. Pain exploded through his ribs, but he struggled to push himself up. The creatures were closing in on Maria and Lily. Maria screamed, and Jack knew he couldn't let them take them. He staggered to his feet, still clutching the pocket knife, and lunged at the nearest alien. Before he could reach it, the creature's arm whipped out, grabbing him by the throat and lifting him off the ground. His vision blurred as the air was squeezed from his lungs. With everything he had left, Jack forced his hand up, plunging the pocket knife into the creature's wrist. The creature recoiled, its grip loosening for just a moment. That moment was enough. With a roar, Jack kicked his legs and pushed himself free. He hit the ground, but was already scrambling toward his family. "Lily, Maria, get to the tent, now!" Jack barked. The aliens were closing in. There was no way to outrun them. Jack had no weapons or plan, only a desperate need to protect his family. Just as the first alien reached out for Lily, Jack tackled it with all his strength. The creature was like stone, but Jack fought with every ounce of his energy. In the chaos, he heard Maria's voice. "Jack, please, we need to go, now!" For a split second, he hesitated, just long enough for another of the creatures to seize Lily. "No!" Jack screamed. He lunged at the creature holding Lily, his knife raised high. Then the world exploded. A brilliant, blinding flash of light engulfed everything, and the last thing Jack saw was the terrified face of his daughter, before everything went dark. Jack woke with a jolt, gasping for air. His heart was pounding, his body drenched in sweat. He couldn't tell if he was still in the forest or lying on the ground at the campsite. He sat up, his hands trembling, the remnants of the fight still lingering in his mind. "Maria? Lily?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. The camp was quiet. His wife and daughter were still asleep in the tent, undisturbed by the nightmare that had just unfolded in Jack's mind. Jack staggered to his feet, shaken, and walked toward the campfire, trying to steady his breath. His pocket knife was lying next to the log where he had been sitting earlier. He picked it up, inspecting the blade. His fingers paused as he noticed something strange. The blade, once sharp and unmarred, was now bent, curved unnaturally. His heart skipped a beat. The dream had felt so real, but this was impossible. Jack clenched his fists around the damaged blade, confusion flooding his mind. The strange humming sound he had heard in his dream echoed for a moment before the forest returned to its eerie, quiet stillness. Jack didn't know what was real anymore, but he was ready to go home. Whatever had happened in that dream, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Today, nobody was taking his family away from him. Not today. They're not.